the work you do, think about all the people you work with. Is it organized like this? Is it organized more like this? What difference does it make? Well, I've always been interested in how people work together. I think it's because I grew up on a farm, 12,000 chickens. It seemed like we were always working. And it really seemed to make a difference how we did it. Whether we were taking care of the chickens, whether we were canning tomatoes, working in the garden. You know, did we do it well? Did we do it quickly? Did we have time to play? Even play was inventing things like pillows for cows and lanterns made out of fireflies. But it really seemed to matter. And it was fun. So, you know, fast forward a few years, and one year a flu came through the county, Lancaster County, and almost all of our chickens died. So I remember that day when a couple of men in dark suits and shiny shoes came crunching down the lane, not to take over the farm, but to recruit my dad to work in real estate. And he did. A few years later, my mom joined him. They were used to working together. And so we moved into town. And it seemed like life went from talking about farming to talking about real estate. And about 10 years later, they started their own company, and it became the largest real estate company in Lancaster County, about 100 associates. But what I really noticed was the way they worked with people, whether it was the farm, whether it was a real estate company, there was something kind of similar. It was whether they were working with each other, with their colleagues, with their clients, with the builders, the bankers, the lawyers. They really strived to build relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, mutual respect throughout their network. It was kind of a harmonious way of working and getting sometimes very difficult work done. But I wasn't really interested in farming or real estate. It wasn't really my thing. I did a lot of jobs. You know, I painted houses, I worked at the Gap, I waited tables. I taught migrant farm workers in Oregon. I taught city kids in Brooklyn. I lobbied in DC. But what really interested me is how people work together. Particularly, how do we work together to create value? So I became a social scientist. And when I eventually went off to MIT to get my PhD in management, I wanted to study that more. And some colleagues said, you should check out the airlines. They're going through some really tough times right now. And, you know, it's kind of a transition in the industry. You might really learn something about how people work together, what difference does it make. So I go off to Logan Airport to watch how people do it. You know, that's the way I think one great way to study things is just like we were hearing, just go watch it and talk to people and hear what they're thinking about their work. And this is kind of what I was hearing. You know, people felt like they were in their little bubble, you know, doing their job, and they were having a hard time getting timely communication from other people when they needed it, accurate communication. People didn't share their goals. They didn't seem to understand each other's jobs. They didn't seem to necessarily feel respect for their jobs. And when things went wrong, a lot of finger pointing rather than problem solving. And you could tell there's a lot of frustration. So it's like pretty strong ties within these bubbles, but across, it started to break down. And the station manager, Lynn Heitman, this was American Airlines in Boston, was really frustrated as well. And my interview with her was like her exit interview. Not only was she leaving American, she was leaving the industry. She had had it. But she did say as she was leaving, you know, you should study Southwest. I'm like, what's that? Who's that? But I figured it out. They hadn't come to the Northeast yet. And I got access and started to study this other airline. And, you know, interviewing people, watching what they did, and it seemed like there were some real differences. They talked about having the same goals. You know, they each had different jobs, but we're here to get you there on time with your luggage and happy and so on, safely. And they seemed to understand each other's job, not just their own job, but how it connected, and to feel respect for each other's work. The skycap's just as important as the pilot. You know, no one department's any more important than the other. The kind of things you would hear. And so I thought this could be really interesting. This could be driving outcomes that any organization might care about. So I expanded my sample, several sites in Southwest, American, added United, and Continental, and figured out, now how do I measure these things? So I came up with 7 questions, these what I call relationships and communication, and asked people to answer them about each of the functions, each of the work groups involved in their work process. So you develop basically a network measure, and got a lot of input from our flight transportation lab on the other side of campus. I'm at the management school, and they're at the very other end, but you go track them down, they know a lot about measuring outcomes and how to risk adjust and so on. So what I eventually found, and this is a kind of a snapshot of a lot of regression models, but that these risk-adjusted quality performance outcomes are very tied to the strength of those ties across work groups, something that's pretty invisible, driving something that managers are trying very hard to achieve. And not only to get the high quality, but to do it efficiently enough that they can offer the low fares and not go out of business. So I thought this was interesting, and my colleagues at MIT thought it was pretty interesting too, but they thought, you know, maybe this is just an airline thing, or maybe it's just a Southwest thing. And I didn't think so. I thought it was bigger than that. About that time, I went into the hospital for the first time ever as a patient, have my baby, first baby, Rose. And so the next day, I wasn't thinking about too much while she was being born, except her. But the next day, I noticed that my nurses were working really well together. And you know, one would come in and say, I know you've heard about this, I just wanted to reinforce it and tell you about that. All these people buzzing around, a lot of information to take in as a new parent. And I said, you know, this is really impressive. You've been working on your coordination. And one of them said, yeah, we've been doing TQM, and it's working great. And then I said a little later, when's my doctor coming? Oh, we don't know. They don't tell us anything. So I thought, okay, this could be a challenge here too, where in these bubbles or silos, people have the same jobs, they understand each other's work, they respect it, same goals. It doesn't always happen that way, but it tends to. And then across, where the coordination needs to happen as well, things start to break down. So I thought, I better study this. And that became my first study a few years later when I started teaching at Harvard Business School. And that was the first study of beyond airlines. And I found 9 hospitals that were doing, you know, high volumes of joint replacements, and in New York, Dallas, and Boston, and measured these same ties across the people who were involved in joint replacement surgeries, surgeons, nurses, physical therapists, case managers, social workers, and measured these outcomes, again with partnership with colleagues who really know the industry, know the outcomes, and I found something pretty similar going on here. And so I wasn't surprised at this point. I had expected, given all the interdependence and uncertainty of the work, this was probably going to matter for performance. But when I talked to, some people were surprised. I remember a conversation with a surgeon who said kind of quietly to me, you know, I believe the findings, I've read the articles, you know, but it's hard for me and my colleagues to realize it's not just what we're doing on the operating table that matters. You know, because I was looking here, these outcomes include length of stay, patient satisfaction, clinical outcomes, and it really was driven not just by the skill of the surgeon, but by this whole set of connections, this whole coordination across this team. So not so surprising, but and I didn't really come away with this sense of, based on my research, you really can't blame the individuals involved here, because if you think about it, go back to that organization chart, that's how we often organize the work. The people are accountable for outcomes in their own silo, they're rewarded for their outcomes in their own silo, they're selected and trained pretty much to focus on their own job, and even conflict resolution tends to happen up and down that silo, not necessarily across where the patient journey goes. So it's something kind of built into the situation, and as I did this research, found that cross-cutting structures, where they existed, predicted higher RC and higher performance outcomes, but we're not there in many cases. So fast forward to 2011. I don't know what it was about that year, but several people I'd never met approached me, either by phone or email, or some came to visit, to say, you know, this is cool research, but I think it could really help us in practice too. We could use this tool as an organizational change kind of method. And I said, well, that's way over my head, but go for it and let me watch what you do. And some things in common. So we find an organization like many that's struggling with coordination, create a change team, need some leaders, bunch of people from frontline, different stakeholders, and then often we'll do an assessment, a measurement of relational coordination to see how are we doing on these dimensions. You know, where are the weak ties, where are the strong ties, and they say it's kind of like looking in the mirror together, or putting the elephant on the table, or in Canada they sometimes say, we put the moose on the table, so you can all kind of look at it together, but it's really just looking at our own data, and helping us see and have conversations that we don't usually see, like, oh, you know, we're kind of weak on timely communication. Well, what's timely for you guys? Oh, well, I didn't realize if we come here in the morning rather than the afternoon to check on the patient, we can get them out sooner. And, you know, we're low on shared knowledge. Well, what do you guys do? And how does it relate to our job? Or we're having a problem here with respect. Well, what does respect look like for you? So it starts to open up this kind of humble inquiry that can lead to solutions. And it's not top-down, and it's not rocket science. But some of these solutions are kind of redesign of our basic structures. Some of them are microstructures, like we should have morning huddles. You know, that might work. And you can experiment with them, because now you know what you're trying to get to, so you can kind of experiment. Some of them are macro structures, like we need a different kind of accountability so that we're not just siloed, and that might involve people higher in the organization, reward structures. You might have to talk to your payers if you're in the healthcare industry. So there are macro things that aren't that easy to pull off, and there are micro structures that we can change right away. But often the conversations really do revolve around these dimensions, and they're fairly simple to fix, because these are not like really challenging concepts. The word relational coordination is a little complicated, but the underlying ideas are really simple. So where's the work? I mean, I think one thing, the work now has gone beyond the US and healthcare. You know, just looking at patient care, people have been working with this in Canada, in the UK, in Ireland, in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. They tend to like it quite a bit. Australia, Japan, Netherlands. So it's really fun to see people take a really simple idea and make it work in their own very unique environments. And talk about unique, I've got colleagues now who are looking at this, some of them in their dissertations, some in real life work, banking in Pakistan, and retail in China, construction industry in Norway, where I go talk to them in 2 weeks about what they're doing there, and even immigrant integration into Swedish communities, and how do we think about connecting across a community to integrate new immigrants into our society. But I think what it is basically a very simple idea, and it basically suggests we have the power to change our organizations, but we often don't even realize it. And it involves, first of all, this kind of shift, or maybe flip, in the way we look at our organizations. Do we see them as that org chart? Which basically suggests that the coordination that we need is happening up here, and down here we're just basically doing our own jobs, because there are no lines there. It's pretty much only connected up here. Or do we see that network where any of those lines might be necessary? And we've got to be paying attention to who we might need to communicate with at any moment, rather than waiting for that coordination to happen up here. Because it's not going to happen. Most organizations are too complex. It gets overloaded very quickly when you try to centralize like that. So it's a big aha. There are two places where I think are very cool that I'll just share where I think some of the new frontiers are. One of them is building safe communities. And some of this work is happening in Massachusetts cities, where, you know, getting together youth advocates with people from the district attorney's office and the police and the probation officers and the schools, and, you know, even the faith communities, to talk about, you know, what is it that we're doing that's not working here? And can we build some of these bridges across our differences so that we can address substance abuse and youth violence and so on. And these aren't easy conversations. I've listened into some of them, and they basically get down to, you know, are you guys just into the school to prison pipeline, or are we going to do something about this? You know, because there are different interests, and how do we find that shared goal and start to work around it? And you see, there are some strong ties, and, you know, we can recognize those, but those orange ones are where they're like seriously weak ties at the start. And we'll see what comes after all the work they're doing. Another one that I'm really passionate about is educating our students. I think this is another cool frontier for RC work. Because if you think about it, schools, like most of our industries, have inherited bureaucracy. They've been around forever, so of course we've got these bureaucratic models where students sit in their classroom, teachers pretty much do their own thing, and there's not a lot of connecting. But when you think about the innovations in education and in the workplace that we're preparing our students to go out and succeed in, it's not about sitting there in a chair and telling what you know. It's about performing, it's about connecting, it's about doing things which requires a very collaborative school community. Whether you call it competency-based learning, student-centered learning, project-centered learning, it's really about connecting across a lot of these levels to and with students and families in order to build those capabilities. So I think it's really promising. I think there's some work going to go on here in Rochester, certainly Boston, and I'm very excited about it. We got a lot of people talking here today about education, so I know we all care about it. It's our future. So just to sum up, you can take a simple idea. I think like most simple ideas, they apply a lot of places. It's not like the golden rule or anything, but there's some ideas that they're so basic, a lot of the things we're talking about here today, that you could translate them into many countries and many industries and sectors. That's what makes maybe an idea worth spreading. It's so simple. But it, first of all, requires kind of a different way of looking at things, as we've heard a lot. In this case, a different way of looking at our organizations rather than those charts that suggest that the only connections are needed up here, to a network map where you can see the opportunities for so many more connections that could be really productive and create value. So I would encourage you, so it applies globally, but I also like to think that people often say, it works really well at home too. Try it on your teenagers. That's kind of a cool thing that you can think about how to use this at home, think about how it might change the way you do your work, might change the way you think about your community, and whose job is it to organize the community and organize the neighborhood. So I would suggest you just give it a try. Thank you.